Well, welcome again. We welcome you to this introduction session on ArcGIS Maps SDK for .NET. I am Preeti Maske, product owner for .NET SDK team, joined by my colleague Thad here, who's the product owner for our entire documentation for .NET SDK. This year we have 3 sessions on .NET SDK. Session 1, which is this session, is and a brief introduction on how to get started with ArcGIS Maps SDK for .NET. Session 2 is on building .NET MAUI apps specifically. So if in that session we'll go in through the process of building a .NET MAUI application using Maps SDK for .NET. So if you're planning on developing a new cross-platform app or have an existing Xamarin Forms app or native application using 100X series, we highly recommend you go and attend that session to get an introduction on getting started with building .NET MAUI apps specifically. Then session 3 is a further deep dive into more advanced workflow, like how to incorporate MVVM patterns, learning different tips and tricks, understanding challenges of building a cross-platform app. So those are the things that are talked about in that advanced workflow sessions. All these 3 sessions are quite informative and have some great content, so we really recommend you attend all 3 of them. All right, so what are we talking about today? We'll start with an overview of the SDK to give you a brief introduction on what our SDK offers and what capabilities it has. We'll spotlight on what has changed from last year's Dev Summit. So within this 3 year, what have we developed? What are the some of the new features and GIS capabilities brought into native SDKs? Then I'll briefly dive into building a simple .NET app using .NET SDK. Like, how do I get started with building an app using our ArcGIS Maps SDK for .NET? Then we'll also be touching on different UI frameworks that you can possibly use if you're targeting .NET SDK, and decide which one best suits your development needs and your customer needs if you're developing for customers. In the end, we'll serve through various SDK resources that will help you get going with learning different GIS capabilities, get sample codes, copy paste, helper codes from different other places, bring them in your application to give you that, cranking get started with developing your applications without surfing through various API references and other things. All right, so what is ArcGIS Maps SDK for .NET, or rather, what is ArcGIS Maps SDK for native apps in general? Our SDK provides powerful APIs to enable mapping and GIS capabilities in your apps. Using APIs, you can build applications that are connected to ArcGIS systems like ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. So you can have your data hosted on an ArcGIS Online premise or an ArcGIS portal, and then you can consume your maps and data from that portal into your apps. One of the key aspects of using native SDKs is that you can build apps that are enabled with offline workflows. By using local maps, local data, you can build applications that are occasionally or completely disconnected from a network. I think that's the key point that differentiates us from us in the sense native SDKs from other APIs like JavaScript SDK or JavaScript API, because they are on browser, they can be disconnected. But with native SDKs, you can go completely or partially disconnected as needed. The latest version of our .NET SDK supports Android, iOS, macOS, Windows, which means you can build applications that can target both desktop and mobile devices. And on top of that, the common code or the common API or app development experience enables you to write applications that will work on all these platforms. So you develop once and target these 4 different platforms. Are there any 115 users in the room? Xamarin Forms users? Oh, there is one. Great. Well, you should now move to 200. Just for some background, until last year of December, we had our 100 series that went up to 115. And we decided that we need to really upgrade our development environments and some development tooling. So we built upon 115 and released 200 version in last December. So we qualified our 115 release as the long-term service release, for which we have been releasing patches. So 115 is our last major release for ArcGIS runtime SDKs for .NET. In December of 2022, we built upon 115, rebranded all our native SDKs as ArcGIS Maps SDK for native apps. And this was done purely to support development tooling and development environments provided by Apple, Google, Microsoft, Qt. So as they are advancing, we need to advance our development technology and tooling. And since 200 is released, all new features across all native SDKs are only being added to our 200 releases. 115 patches have been frequently getting released, but they only include all the bug fixing and critical patches. So if you are still using 115, we highly encourage you now move to the latest 200 SDK. All right. So it's been a year and we have released 3 patches. So what's new in 200? Here is a glimpse of all the new API advancements that have been released in each minor version that was released in different months. We have a cadence. If you notice here, we have a cadence of releasing every 4 months, April, August, December, and then again in April. So in these 4 months cadence, a lot of new features get added on different areas of the SDK. And sometimes a feature is released in one version and is enhanced and matured in multiple releases that it follows. And I can go over some of the cool features that we have released in 201. So 201, which was in April of 2023, we released support for stream data. Now this with the dynamic, so these stream services supported through Dynamic Entities API. You can use this API to connect to ArcGIS stream service, bring data updates directly in your app, and process them in real time. Then we worked on Geometry Editor. This is built from ground up to be a successor for Sketch Editor. If some of you know, this was our editing tool for 115. We built it as a new geometry editor to support vertex, edge, multi-part selection, and other finer grained tools for the editing experience. So you might be wondering why create a new one when there was one already existing. Well, we started this route so it can pave the way for more enhanced geometry editing capabilities that we have planned for future releases. For example, snapping and curve support. So the existing sketch editor was limiting us to expand and bring in those functionalities. Another cool feature was feature tiling enhancements. This provides an opt-in experience for developers to request high-resolution geometries from a service. So with this API call, you can now request feature services to return high-resolution images in form of PBF. Then we expanded support for offline traces. This release included support for tracing while disconnected from utility network services. And we also expanded support for isolation and other offline support traces use cases for offline areas. So that's another area we expanded our support on in 201. And then with every release, of course, I don't have to mention it, we work on all the bug fixes, not all the bug fixes. We work on most critical bug fixes and third-party library updates that are necessary for each release or have been prioritized for a release. Then came 202. In 202, we added support for 3D-based maps. As you all know, there's always a need for having 3D-enabled content, but or we can always bring 2D data to a 3D, but they lack a bit of extra context. With that in mind, Esri started developing 3D-based maps like 3D building, 3D trees, and the support for some of them was added in 202. I think trees and labels went and followed a little bit later. Another cool feature, as you can see, is 3D data filtering. We have heard some of the users complain about 3D data coming in their way in putting their data up front. So we added a filter API through 3D suite of our workflows where users can select polygons and now apply filter so that they can get more room to work with their own data. Another cool feature, and this is one of the most commonly or most requested feature or highly requested feature from our users, is point feature clustering. As you can see on the map, data is clustered in points, and as you zoom in and out, the data is reclustered, and based on the zoom extent, it's clustered and aggregated based on the data in that extent. Then we work on custom feeds. In last release, we introduced support for dynamic entities API, but with 202 release, we added support for custom feeds that allow users to get real-time data from anything besides Velocity server. Are we getting feedback?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. To get feeds from other areas besides anything published for ArcGIS server.
Turn down its rebel.
Hmm?
Turn on its rebel on
I think you might take your badge off. It's in your mic. Yes.
Okay, this is better. Yeah. So as I mentioned in 201, we created a new geometry editor. That was added in all platforms. So in 202, geometry editor got added to .NET SDK as well. And this new editor, geometry editor, had methods for rotate, scale, and move. So we thought it might be useful for Geometry Engine to have these methods as well. So users can just use Geometry Engine to do rotation, scaling, and moving the graphics. And some more bug fixes and third-party library updates. Moving on to 203, in previous slide I showed you a slide where the data was clustered on the map. That was primarily using anything that was authored in the data when you publish the map or the layer that was enabled with clustering. So that was the honoring workflow. But in 203, we added a brand new API to allow you to now cluster the data on your feature layer, which is not pre-clustered, and specify all the aggregation statistics and methods and apply it on the layer. So if you see here, by setting the cluster feature reduction here, I can now set feature reduction property on a feature layer, which will enable clustering on the client side without having it pre-configured in my published data. We introduced some new base map styles, more geometry editor enhancements to see the feedback here as you draw the graphics, and bug fixes and third parties. So this was, so far I've talked about what cool features have been developed in 200 series that are available across native SDKs. But what's new in 200 for ArcGIS Maps SDK for .NET? So latest version of our Maps SDK for .NET is built on .NET 8. We strictly, or we very carefully follow Microsoft's release cycle for .NET version. Our .NET 8 template, our .NET 8 is the current LTS version offered by Microsoft. So our templates and our SDK is purely built on .NET 8. We made a lot of improvements to authentication. Our templates, as mentioned, are also .NET 8. We made a lot of improvements to authentication workflows, memory management, and cache performance. A lot of new features got added to our toolkit offering that has been also upgraded to use .NET 8, uses high rendering pop-up viewer, and great support for .NET MAUI and WPF. And we also added a new toolkit component called GeoView Controller to enable easy adoption of MVVM patterns in cross-platform applications. And then we added support for development for macOS. This will be talked more in building .NET MAUI sessions. So if you want to learn how to set up your Mac and begin development on macOS, I encourage you to attend that session. All right, so we've talked enough, looked at what are the cool features, and I will quickly take you on a tour of how to build the new app from scratch using SDK. I don't want the screen. So while my Visual Studio is opening, to get started, there are a couple ways. You can install project templates from within Visual Studio using Extension Manager. Or you can also install project templates from Visual Studio Marketplace. So if you crack open Visual Studio, and right now I'm going to start without code, and go to extensions here and say manage extensions. And in the online category, search for category called ArcGIS. There are a lot of other extensions offered through Esri under this name. But if you look here, this is the templates that are offered for ArcGIS Maps SDK for .NET. And the green check mark indicates that it's already installed. So I've installed 203 version of our templates. So once it is installed, if you go File, New Project, and if you search, so there are other categories here. If you search through ArcGIS, you will see all the templates for different UI frameworks that are currently supported. We have Universal, we have few WinUIs, we have .NET MAUI, and we have .NET WPF. I'm going to just go with WPF here. Give some default name, location, and the framework. Now here, .NET 8 shows up as the only option here. I want to just highlight the fact that this dropdown follows what frameworks are supported by Microsoft. So up until 201, you would have seen .NET 6 here. But because .NET 6 is soon out of support and then .NET 8 is the latest LTS, so we now see .NET 8 here. In November, when .NET 9 is released, we will have .NET 9 gets added to the list. And in 2 years, when .NET 10 becomes the LTS, we'll move our LTS to .NET 10. So we kind of follow Microsoft LTS version and keep adding versions that are currently supported by Microsoft. We still do support. I don't know if you noticed here, there are no templates for WPF framework. We still do support WPF framework, but Microsoft recommendation is that if you're starting a new development on WPF, we should use WPF.NET for many reasons, because WPF.NET comes with a lot of improvements to caching and performance, for which is not benefited by WPF framework anymore. So if you want to take advantage of language features or tweaks to performance and improvements, it's highly recommended that you move to .NET versions of WPF. So moving on, I have a default project name here. I have my framework as .NET 8, and I'll just create an app here. So what it did is it created a default app. And if you look at the dependencies and packages here, it has pulled down WPF 203 NuGet package from the NuGet server. So this is kind of a ready-to-use template available. You can just create a template. It'll pull down the NuGet packages that are needed, and will get you started right away. In application, it comes with a map view model. Map view model has code to initialize your map in the app. Because it's a view model. The map view control itself is defined in the window here. So if I move this up, this one down, here I have my map view, which is bound to map that I have defined in my map view model. Let's go to map view. Current map that is used, and you would see here that base map is commented out. We need base map to render on the map, but I also see a warning here that says For ArcGIS location services or use of any base maps, an API developer key is required. Does anyone here does not know how to get an API developer key? Great, everybody knows. So I'm gonna uncomment this code and I will go to my developer page and copy my API key. Oh, no, not this one. Did I copy? Hang on. I closed my tab. I copied it in that section. Sorry. Okay. All right, so I got my API key and I'm gonna paste it in this boilerplate code. If I go through some of the code here, this is initializing the ArcGIS runtime and is allowing you to specify a Fluent API to have your app licensed if you have an extension that you want to license your app with, or use an API key. So I'm gonna uncomment this and I will provide an API key that I just copied and you guys saw me copying. It also provides you a default challenge handler if your app is doing some sort of authentication against your portal, or you can also use some OAuth authentication and define your URIs and OAuth handlers and configure your authentication workflows. And really, that's all you need. You need a template that will download the NuGet server. You need an API key, and you need the data that you need to author in your app. This will quickly get me started, and I have my application ready to go. So we saw how to quickly build an app. Let's talk briefly about different frameworks that are available and what framework should I pick. So currently we offer WPF, WinUI, UWP, and .NET MAUI. If you ask what should I pick, as always, the answer is going to be depends. So first three here are Windows platform. So if you have something that is not Windows specific, then .NET MAUI is your obvious choice because that supports cross-platform and can run on Windows, iOS, macOS, and Catalyst. WPF being an older technology, it's like some 15 plus years old, is pretty mature and has a lot of functionalities. And some companies have a legacy requirement of building on WPF. But if that's the case, then WPF is your only choice. But Microsoft, as I mentioned earlier, Microsoft recommends any new WPF development, .NET is highly recommended framework to choose. UWP has been around for a while. It runs on its own .NET native runtime and runs as a sandboxed app. So it runs in a very secured mode, and there is a limit to what app is allowed to do. For example, accessing files on the machine. So some of these are very much controlled in this sandbox framework and can come in a lot of ways where you want to expand capabilities of your app. The third candidate for Windows is WinUI. WinUI is basically UWP XAML framework, and they kind of pull it out of the sandbox and make it run on top of .NET. So that gives you some of the functionality or .NET features that UWP will not see. The last and the most common these days is .NET MAUI, which is a cross-platform UI framework that enables you to develop once and target on different platforms like Android, iOS, macOS, and Catalyst. And as I mentioned, to learn more about building cross-platform app, we have a session on Thursday, so please attend that session. Well, that was a quick glance on what we have delivered or worked on since last year, how to quickly get to download the templates and get started with the app. But that's not all you need for developing an app. You need more resources. You need to learn more. You can be learning every API by looking through it in the API reference. There are shortcuts that you can take. And we have lots and lots of resources that you can make use of to build your own app. and just pull in functionality from different places that offer code examples and sample data. So with that, I will hand it over to Thad to take us to a tour of what all resources are available that can help you just getting started with your app and just cranking your development right away. With that, Thad, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you switch on
Yeah.
3? Okay, thanks. And let me know if you guys can't hear me okay. That's good. Okay, cool. So I know this is going to be kind of a review for a lot of you guys, so maybe I'll apologize in advance. I'm going to try to give you sort of a whirlwind tour of some of the SDK resources you guys have. The assumption being that you're just getting started with our SDK. Maybe you're experienced .NET developers, but you just want to know kind of how to get started, what resources are available. So, my first sort of gut reaction is just let's give them all these URLs that they can use. Give them all the stuff that they can check out. And I just didn't want to overwhelm you. So I'm going to try to structure this with start here, and then you can find your way to where you need to go. So if you start at the developers guide landing page here, so just developers.arcgis.com/net. Maybe you guys have been here before. Here's where you're going to find all the sort of conceptual information. So, what kind of stuff can I do with the SDK? How do I work with map my device location or 3D or geo triggers or all that kind of cool stuff? What kind of system requirements do I need for my development machine, for my target machines? What's licensing considerations? All that stuff is sort of here, that high level doc that you'll need to get started. And then from here, of course, you can find your way into other things like Preeti mentioned the API reference, the low-level information. You're in the weeds working with a certain class, certain members, and you want to see what parameters are available, how it works. So we have a very rich API reference for all the different platforms that Preeti mentioned. How about samples? I think, speaking for myself and probably a lot of the developers I've met, samples are really like where you want to go, right? You can borrow code, you can quickly kind of see how things are put together. We have so many samples there. I meant to count them before I came in, but I think there's around 200
plus.
200 plus samples now. So they're very focused. They show you how to do one specific thing, so they're fairly succinct, but there's lots of good stuff there. I'll show you some more information about that in a bit. Tutorials. So maybe you're just really brand new, you're kind of green, maybe to .NET development in general. Maybe you want to start with a tutorial and some hand-holding that'll take you sort of from start to finish with some common functionality. Building a map, geocoding an address, finding a route, like all that basic stuff. Maybe you're a seasoned WPF developer, but now you're dabbling in Maui. Well, we have some Maui tutorials as well, so that'll kind of get you up to speed with that. And then finally, toolkit. So we have a toolkit that it's open source. You can download these components to kind of just jumpstart your development. Things like legends and measure toolbars, scale bars, all that cool stuff that you might want to add. And I'll show you more about this as we go. That was just kind of an overview. So let's start with tutorials. We have, I think, maybe 12, 15 tutorials. And again, they really just walk you through these different bits of functionality. We have a tutorials page here that you'll find from that guide, and you can see them categorized by functionality, so you can kind of see which ones you want to work with perhaps. Common things like displaying maps and scenes, geocoding search, routing. Maybe you don't want to do the tutorial, but you want to see the solution code. So you can download any of these tutorial solutions and just start from there. And I'll do that in a sec, show you how that works. They all use the MVVM model view model design pattern. So it's also a good way to get up to speed with that pattern. If you're not familiar with it, they're well designed as a starting point as well. So actually, most instructions are for WPF. Actually, they're all in WPF. So we have WPF for every tutorial, but for 4 tutorials, we also have .NET MAUI. So if you're interested in taking on the .NET MAUI tutorials, there's 4 of them that do some of the common things you might want to do. So samples, you can also get to the samples, of course, from the drop-down menu at the top of the page. When you click that, you'll see all the different platforms that you can jump into for samples. Each documentation page here for the samples will tell you what the sample does, how to run it, the relevant API, and it'll show the source code. So we're still in the doc world here when we're looking at these. It's just documentation about the samples. But you can see at the top of the page, I can click a link to jump into GitHub. And from there, of course, I can, I'll be in the repo and I can clone it or download it or whatever I need to do. These are searchable, so it's really easy. You type in navigation. You'll find all the samples that are related to navigating a route, for example. And they're also categorized, as you can see on the left-hand side there. Switch between different platforms, the ones that Preeti mentioned that we support. So you can quickly see if the sample is available for your platform. Okay. And I'll show you more about that in a bit as well, too. Finally, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the toolkit. We also have a documentation page here in the guide that you'll find about the toolkit. It'll describe all the different components that are available, so you can see the list there in the page. And of course, you can link this link straight into the repo. So once again, now you're in the GitHub repo. You can clone the repo and work with the code locally and all that stuff. You can use the toolkit from a NuGet package that's available for you while you're in Visual Studio, for example, or you can just download the code here and maybe you want to make some tweaks and then compile it yourself. You can do that as well. The community is a good place to go if you have questions. So I guess the first step, you search for a question that you have, perhaps. Maybe someone else has already run into it and you find an answer that way. You can also submit a question if you like. Lots of good collaboration going on there. As you can see, there's a lot of people from the .NET team that check in and are available to answer questions. You can also see I have some catching up to do to get to Preeti. I'm a little bit behind here. So another place, I'll show you, actually, if you just go to the first part of this URL, instead of going all the way to that last part, if you just go github.com/Esri, from there you can search for .NET, D-O-T-N-E-T, and you'll find a lot of different repos that might be of interest there. One of them is this one called .NET Demos. So these are, instead of samples, these are full projects. So this is each one is a project that you can run separately. They're also designed well with MVVM patterns. The geometry editor, which is as Preeti mentioned, is one of the newer APIs that we have. There's a really good sample for working with that. Symbols, routing, all kinds of good stuff there. So check that out. Okay, so why don't we take just a quick run through here. And again, I'm going to start right from the landing page here for the developer guide. So this is, again, our 200.x, at this point, 200.3 version. I can see the current version here at the top of the page. And as Preeti mentioned, we release 3 times a year. I can see the last release here was late last year. And we have another one coming up next month. What if I'm looking for the 100.15 doc? I have a link here over to the side. Remember, this is our long-term support release. So I have essentially like the same kind of doc here. Just notice if I put this /v100, now I'm in 100 land instead of 200 land, and I can see the relevant doc there. Okay. So if I'm just getting started, I might go ahead and just click the big purple button here right on the landing page. And I can see some basic instructions for getting started. Getting my developer account, getting the SDK, that might be through NuGet packages, it might be from downloading them. Getting an access token, that means API key or authenticating with OAuth. So just some basic steps to get you started. At the top here, you'll see maybe actually step 0 for doing this, right? The first step might be, do I have the right system requirements? Does my development machine meet the system requirements? What do I need for any target devices that I'm developing for, all that? So if I click this and jump into system requirements, you'll see what that looks like. A lot of requirements here. For, .NET is one of the SDKs that has, I guess, the most doc here for system requirements, simply because we have so many different platforms that we support. We can support Android devices and iOS and macOS. So there's a lot to say here in this topic, and you'll find lots of good information here. I can see in the table of contents, if I go into prior releases, I can actually, maybe I haven't gone up to 200.3 yet. Maybe I'm still on 200.0, and I can see, what's supported at that version. I can also see the other versions. Is it a good time to migrate? Am I going to lose one of my target devices if I go up to 200.3, for example, or am I good staying where I am? Similar treatment here for release notes. I have the one topic, kind of prominent topic here for the current release. So when Preeti stepped through sort of the history of the last couple releases and some of the things that we added, she's really talking about the enhancements here in the release notes. So you can get that information from the release notes. And if I open that, I can see I can go back to all the previous versions as well. And I can go into the 100 versions. In addition to enhancements, I can also look at things like the breaking changes, any deprecations that have happened either within our API or from frameworks and operating systems that we support. Some good news here, if you come into this section, you might be happy to see issues resolved. So maybe you had a bug that you recorded, you want to see if it's been resolved in this release so you can finally move to that, the newest version. We have, some of these are listed by our internal tracking number for the bug. You'll get that if you log a bug with Esri, so you can kind of keep tabs on it. But notice some of these are also listed by just questions on the community. So I think this is kind of a cool thing. It's if we have someone ask a question on the community, sorry, my internet connection seems pretty slow. And we find that maybe it's a bug with the SDK or something that should just work better. We'll go ahead and work on that, and hopefully with a new release we'll be able to list that as one of the addressed issues that we fix. So that's what we have going on here. Someone had a question, a problem that we couldn't resolve. We ended up fixing it later. Known issues. So maybe I run into something and I'm like, this isn't really working the way it's supposed to. Is it me, or is it like something that's just a known issue that I can look up? So thankfully, there's usually not too many here. There's usually more resolved issues, I would hope. So yeah, maybe you start here, look for a known issue, then you go to the community, search for a question there. You don't see anyone with the same question, then you ask the question. Okay. So I would say in the table of contents here for the doc, I would say everything above this little separator line is more like the high level stuff about the SDK. How do you get started? How do you install? System requirements. Stuff below that line is the more conceptual stuff that you might be interested in. So more about the functionality of the SDK. And you can see we have several sort of sections that you can dive into with more information. Some of those will have a list of tutorials that you can do. So one thing you might be interested in is, licensing. That might be a good one to look at. License levels, capabilities. Once I'm ready to release my app, what kind of licensing do I need? If I have a standard license, what does that give me? Those kind of things. Here, if I dive into maps as just an example, the structure of these usually describe what you can do with that part of the SDK. Talk about some of the common classes, like the map class, for example, short code snippets that you can use. And then lots of good examples. Simple, usually, how to display a map, a web map, a mobile map. So very focused, very simple, short sort of code snippets. If you want to, again, step through something like a tutorial, we have a tutorial section or page that will show these all according to these different functional areas. And I'm just going to jump quickly to one of these. So search for an address. Now, the idea with the tutorials is usually the first step is to either go back and complete display a map tutorial and then come back and start with this one from that solution. Or download the solution for display a map and then come back and do this one. There's a third option that you might like even better, and that is just download this solution and let's run it and see what it does. So, I mean, you can see a lot of these have quite a few steps. You might not really feel like going through all these. You just want to see how it works. Okay. I'm going to download this. Hopefully, my Wi-Fi is good enough to do this fairly quickly. They're small. They're only a few K. Okay. I'll go ahead and extract that. It's like I've already done this once before. Now, when I try to run this, of course, there's going to be one thing that's just blatantly missing. I think you guys probably know. I'm going to have to add an API key for this. The tutorials are really good about listing exactly where your API key needs to go. And luckily, I have one here available. Let's go ahead and copy that. Okay. Okay, so this is going to just geocode an address. And of course, we have to do 380 New York Street, standard. Esri headquarters. Yeah. Everyone should know where Esri is. Come on. Okay, there we go. All right, so that works. And now I might use that as a starting point for my own geocoding application. Let's just jump in and look at the samples real quick. Maybe I want to look for a sample that allows me to change the marker there. It was kind of ugly for that address result. Maybe I want to put a picture marker in there. The cool thing about the doc here for the samples is, yeah, there you go. We have some a good description of the sample, a screenshot. Sorry, I don't mean to make you dizzy by scrolling too much. But if I go to the bottom, I have the sample code. So I can see, the XAML that defines the UI, and I can see the C# code as well. So it's really easy to just copy and paste something from here if I like. Remember, I can also go to the top here and go into GitHub if I want and see the code. I can also download the sample viewer app. And I don't need to do that because I already have it here locally.
We currently only have WPF in App Store, but we
Yeah.
plan on having .NET MAUI soon.
So this is if you were to download the sample repo or to clone it locally and then build it, this is what you'd see. So it's a really cool little app for browsing the code. And it's kind of like looking at the documentation for the samples with one obvious benefit is I can actually run the code here. So, I mean, yeah, I can look at the description. It's the same one I saw in the doc. I can look at the source code. But, I mean, the cool thing is I can just run it too right here. So that's kind of neat. Okay, so what we're going to look for, we're going to look for a picture marker symbol. These are searchable as well, which is really cool. And, okay, there's picture marker symbol here. And there's a picture that I can use. Go to the source code. We only have a couple lines of code, so that's pretty easy. Whoops. So obviously I can just easily copy and paste and borrow code from all these different sources, from samples, tutorials, wherever I need to go. This is a MVVM app, so there's my map view model. Here's where I make the graphic with that address result. It's going to be called campsite symbol. I'm going to make it a little bigger. And I'm going to change actually the URI. I have a better URL that we can use that might be a little more appropriate here. Let me see. Yeah, that's the one. I guess I could use the Esri logo or something, might have been cool. But okay, so now I'll just run my code again. Search. Oh, what happened? Oh, I know what I did, or what I didn't do. I still have the marker symbol. Bam, there we go. Sorry for covering your face with the text, Jack, if you're in the audience. Okay. All right. So just a quick illustration of a lot of the SDK tools. I guess the one other thing that I will show you here is I mentioned you can go to this github.com/Esri. I didn't want to just hit you over the head with a lot of URLs. I think that one's easy enough to remember. Go to GitHub, type in Esri, and then of course you can search for repositories. So it's just .net, and you'll find things like the Pro SDK. I can't help that, but samples, toolkit, demos, and I think you'll find that demos repo pretty interesting. Some really cool apps that you can play with there. Okay. So that was my whirlwind tour there through some of the SDK resources. Hopefully you guys find something useful from that. I know it's probably a review for a lot of you guys. So just to recap what we've talked about here today. So Preeti talked about Maps SDK for .NET, all the different platforms it supports, all the different platforms that you can target. So we have WPF, UWP, WinUI, Maui, of course. Our current version, 200.3, is built on .NET 8. Remember that 100.15 is our long-term support release. And so we're only releasing patches for that, so only bug fixes, no new functionality. And August of this year will be the last patch for the 100.15 series. Preeti showed you how to develop apps using the templates. The templates are a really nice way to get started. Also the tutorials or the samples, good places to maybe get started with one of your own apps. Okay. And then I just wanted to put in a plug for the rest of the sessions that we have coming up today. So 3 .NET related sessions. You guys can check off this one. You got the first one. If you want the trifecta, there's 2 more. You got .NET Maui apps tomorrow, should be a really good one. Or I'm sorry, on Thursday, 10:30. And then for your black belt, we have advanced workflows. That's on Friday at 10:30. And I think that's Morton is doing it. Yeah, if you guys know Morton, he himself is a black belt, so he can teach you all he knows. I also want to put a plug in for another session that I'm doing on Thursday, which is Preeti mentioned the offline workflows. I think that's something that's really cool that kind of differentiates, Maps SDK for native versus, web. So offline workflows tomorrow at 2:30. All right, so we do have some time for questions.
Yeah.
The third session you can offer Friday.
Hmm.
The app shows it at 8:30.
Oh,
Yeah, or not.
oh, thanks for checking that.
Did
I
that
did-
get moved? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. The third one says 8:30. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll be back.
Okay. Thanks for checking in on that. All right. Yeah.
In the resources, you kind of quickly went over the licensing, and this was mentioned in the prior session, that a standard license was required for certain data formats. Is there a list somewhere that says what data, he rattled off a bunch, like GeoTIFF and, is there a list?
Yeah, good question.
So the question is there a documentation available for what type of data formats are supported in standard license? I think our page, if you go back to developer licensing page, A lot of the content does explain what capabilities are available with each license level, but it could differ from different data source. And I recommend reaching out to the licensing team, checking on a particular use
Yeah.
of the data format, for example,
This
KML,
says,
right?
yeah, this says for standard, it gives you access to additional file-based formats. So that might be a key. I don't know, I'm only slightly less confused by our licensing probably than you guys are. Uh, So yeah, additional file-based data formats. So it sounds like some of them might be supported at basic, but this gives you, and it does say which ones that includes. Is that an inclusive list? I don't know. There might be other things that it's not mentioning. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the process of architecting now our move to runtime, and I just want to
Ah.
make sure that whatever formats we're going to recommend to our customers fall within the like, if at all possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good planning. Yeah, I mean, I always talk about licensing like it's maybe the last thing you do when you've got your app all ready to go. That's pretty naive because, yeah, you want to make sure that everything you're using is within what you want your license to be. And yeah, so.
Well, it does say shape files, geo packages, ENC layers, raster layers, local raster, local elevation services. They all require, these formats require standard license.
Geo packages, I'm not familiar with that. Does that include like the MMPs?
No, this is an OGC format. It's an open data format. Yeah. It's a similar idea. It's a package. It either has feature data or imagery that you can pull out and ship around. And, yeah.
Like vector tiles and
Yeah.
MMPs,
Mm.
tile packages were safe for
Yeah.
Similar to that, but not those formats in this package. Like for tile packages, it's TPK for,
Right.
yeah. But it's a package format of OGC data.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, can you say your question?
PII that you're entering, personal information, you need the higher license level to access the features if you have certain restraints on it, laws and users as well. So it gets hairy.
Yeah. Yeah, I should also add, if you guys have, further questions or you just want to sit down and maybe take a deeper dive on some things, we're at the island and, I'd welcome you to come by. We always have 2 to 4 or 5 .NET people over there. And we can take a closer look at things if you have some more questions.
Blazor and SDC, should we use Momly, should we use JavaScript, which one?
Ooh,
That's a tough one.
yeah,
So Blazor or JavaScript? Is that what you're asking?
Well, for Blazor and MVC.
Yeah.
So for the web, should we use JavaScript or Momly?
So you cannot, so we don't have any support for Blazor using .NET MAUI, using .NET SDK, but you can probably develop apps outside .NET SDK that use Blazor. But our SDK has no support for Blazor yet. So if Blazor is what you are targeting, I would probably say JavaScript is your only bet because .NET SDK currently does not support Blazor. Yeah, Blazor and Tizen both are not supported using .NET SDK.
For MVC would be, because Blazor, you have a connection going back over the front view,
Yeah,
whereas MVC is just display it and then you interact.
to interact, yes. Yeah,
So would that be Momly or would that be the JavaScript?
that would be JavaScript. Yeah. So even if that connection is possible, which I'm probably not very familiar with, even if that is possible, you won't get access back into .NET SDK via that channel. We have not opened SDK for interacting with MVC channel through Blazor at all.
yeah, good question.
Any tips for upgrading from .NET 7 to 8? Because we started with .NET MAUI last year, and we're still on .NET 7. And tried downloading some samples and think they're on .NET 8, so we can't run them. So, I mean, for other reasons too, we want to upgrade to .NET 8. But what's the lift there?
The lift,
Yeah.
so the question is, how do we migrate from .NET 7 to .NET 8? I think if you just install .NET 8 and target your applications to use .NET 8, that's all you need from the API side. Your Visual Studio might be missing some components which might require an update, but from SDK point of view, you would not see an immediate need to update anything to be run on .NET 8. It should just work. Yes?
Then there's a slide that looked like .NET Framework 4.7.2 was supported and .NET 8.
Yeah.
Is that just 223? Is that also support for .NET Framework 4.7.2?
So .NET Framework, so question is .NET Framework supported on 203 only, 4.7.2. So .NET Framework has been 4.7.2 for a while now. Yep. It is, yes, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, guys, for showing up. And again, just come and see us at the island if you have more questions. We'd love to talk to you.
Thank you, everyone.